The cloth slipped from Emily's hand and fell onto the polished floor, soaking part of her worn-out shoe. She took a deep breath, resting her other hand on her 7 months pregnant belly. It was early in Boston, and the hallway still echoed with emptiness, but inside room 204 of Carter University, the silence was heavy. Emily bent down carefully, picked up the cloth, and went back to scrubbing the chalk-stained board. With every movement, she felt her back muscles screaming, but she forced herself into a steady rhythm. As she wiped the board, she noticed it was covered in a dense equation, white markings crossing Greek symbols, integrals, and numbers that looked like an indecipherable riddle. Emily stopped, eyes fixed. She recognized the structure immediately. Advanced medical physics calculations applied to radioactive dosage. Her heart raced. This was part of a world that had once been hers and now felt too far away. The door burst open with a sharp bang, interrupting her contemplation. Dean Richard Hayes walked in with firm steps, wearing a flawless grey suit and a gaze full of arrogance. He dropped a heavy briefcase on the front desk and frowned. "Still here?" he asked with disdain, his voice filling every corner of the room. Emily straightened up, adjusting the navy blue uniform that no longer fit her properly. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. I'm just finishing up the cleaning." He laughed humorlessly, shaking his head like he was looking at something ridiculous. "Finishing? You take way too long for such a simple task. My first class will be in here, and I can still smell those cheap cleaning products." Emily lowered her eyes and kept wiping the board. "I'll be quick, sir." Hayes watched her with a crooked smile. Suddenly, he tilted his head and said, "Wait a second. You're pregnant?" She froze. The cloth stuck to the board. "Yes, sir. 7 months." His laugh echoed through the room, deep and cutting. 7 months? And who's the father? Some other janitor? Emily's face burned, but she held her posture. "The father isn't around, sir." "Of course he isn't," he snapped, adjusting his white tie. "That kind of guy never takes responsibility. I bet you didn't even finish high school properly." Emily squeezed the cloth in her hands, holding back tears. "I studied right here, sir. I did 4 years of medical school at this university." Hayes burst into laughter, incredulous. "You, medical school, a janitor in a tight uniform who can barely clean a board? Don't make me laugh." "It's true," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I had to drop out in the 5th year." Hayes raised his eyebrows. "Let me guess, got pregnant by some irresponsible boyfriend and gave up. Classic story of poor scholarship kids who think they're gonna be doctors." Emily said nothing, biting her lips. He stepped closer to the board and pointed at the equation. "You know what this is? Yesterday, my best student spent 2 hours trying to solve it. None of them could." She looked at the symbols and recognized each part like old friends. "So, Dr. Janitor," he continued sarcastically, "show us how a single mum custodian can solve what my elite students couldn't." A noise in the hallway interrupted them. Dr. Charles Miller, an anatomy professor, appeared at the door. Right behind him came Dr. Helen Foster from the physiology department. Both looked curious and stepped closer when they noticed the scene. Hayes raised his voice so they could hear. "I'm going to make a fun proposal. If this janitor can solve this equation correctly, I'll give her $5 million. $5 million? Miller asked, stunned. "Are you serious, Richard?" "Completely serious," the dean replied with a malicious smile. "After all, if she really studied medicine here, solving a little equation shouldn't be a problem." Helen crossed her arms, eyeing Emily with interest. "What kind of equation is it?" "Nuclear physics applied to medicine," Hayes said confidently. "Graduate level." The silence was thick. Emily still held the soaked cloth in her hand. All eyes were on her, like she was some exotic attraction. "Well then, janitor," Hayes provoked, "are you going to accept the bet or admit you lied about your past?" Emily took a deep breath, feeling the baby move inside her. With every heartbeat, her indignation grew. She straightened her shoulders, looked the dean in the eye, and said, "I accept your bet." The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. Miller's eyes widened. Helen covered her mouth in surprise. Hayes blinked, unable to believe it. "You accept?" he asked, his voice less firm than before. "I accept," Emily said, stepping forward. $5 million if I solve it correctly, but I want everyone here as witnesses." Tension spread like wildfire. The professors looked at each other, torn between curiosity and disbelief. Hayes, trying to recover his posture, gave a crooked smile. "Fine, but when you fail, you'll apologize for lying." Emily wiped her hands on her uniform and faced the board, her eyes steady, fearless. Inside her, there was no room left for humiliation, only determination. "Emily Carter?" Dr. Charles Miller's voice echoed through the room, surprised, breaking the silence that had stretched on after her declaration. Helen Foster, still standing at the doorway, leaned slightly forward. "I know that name. Wasn't she that scholarship student, a prodigy in every subject?" Emily took a deep breath, feeling all eyes on her. The memory of who she had once been began to pulse in her mind, as if a dusty veil were being lifted off an old book. "Yes," she said firmly, "that's me." The professor's expressions shifted. Miller frowned, trying to piece together a memory. Helen crossed her arms, eyes narrowed, as if the image of the young student was beginning to overlap with that of the pregnant woman in a janitor's uniform. "It can't be," Hayes muttered, still in disbelief. "You're just a cleaning woman." "My mother's name was Mary Carter," Emily continued, unfazed by his contempt. "She worked her whole life as a housekeeper in Boston. While she spent her days in other people's homes, I studied alone at night, trying to prepare myself to get into college." Helen stepped forward, surprised by the strength in her voice. Emily no longer sounded like the submissive janitor who had shrunk beneath the dean's harsh words. "I got accepted into this institution out of thousands of applicants," Emily went on, her voice choked with memory. "I earned a full scholarship because my grades were the highest. When I started here, I thought everyone would see me as an equal." Miller slowly shook his head, remembering. "Yes, I remember a student who always got top marks in anatomy exams. You answered questions even the residents hesitated to try." Emily nodded, gripping the cleaning cloth still in her hands. "For 4 years, I was top of my class in every subject. I studied medicine with passion, but my heart was in medical physics." Helen pressed her lips together, murmuring to herself, "I read articles signed by you." "I published work in academic journals," Emily confirmed, "the Journal of Nuclear Medicine, Radiology Today. In my 3rd year, I presented a paper on radioactive dosage in pediatric treatments. It was cited in universities around the world." The room fell into absolute silence. The distant sounds of students arriving for class didn't penetrate the space. Hayes watched, visibly unsettled by the weight of her revelations. "Harvard Medical School invited me to join a summer research program," she said, voice steady. "MIT also opened its doors for a joint project in applied physics. I had the world in my hands." Miller's eyes widened. "I remember that. The faculty used to say you'd be the first undergrad from here to collaborate with 2 giants at the same time." Emily took a deep breath, the next memory tasting bitter. "In my 4th year, I met Michael Brown. He was a surgical resident at Massachusetts General Hospital. Smart, charismatic. I believed in him." Helen sighed, already sensing where the story was heading. "We fell in love. We talked about the future. A family, getting married after graduation. I believed every word until I found out I was pregnant." Emily instinctively placed a hand over her belly, as if the gesture connected past and present. "When I told Michael, I thought he'd be happy. I thought he'd support me. Instead, he walked away, said he wasn't ready to be a father, said I should handle it on my own, because his career came first. Miller closed his eyes for a moment, taking in every word. Helen stared at Emily with a mix of sadness and respect. Emily inhaled deeply, her voice now carrying pain that still felt raw. That's when everything started to fall apart. The man I loved turned his back on me, and suddenly, the life I was building shattered into pieces. Hayes crossed his arms, still unsure how to respond. The professors, on the other hand, looked at Emily not as a janitor, but as a missing piece of a story that should have been great. She lifted her chin, determined, not letting emotion break her narrative. That's the truth about who I am. I didn't lie about my education. I was a student at this university. I was one of the best to ever walk these halls, and you all know it. The silence that followed was heavy. Even Richard Hayes, so used to having the last word, couldn't find a response right away. And in that moment, no one saw just a janitor in a Navy uniform. They saw Emily Carter, the brilliant student who had once lit up the halls of Carter University. "Are you going to start or not?" Richard Hayes's impatient voice shattered the silence, turning all eyes back to Emily. She took a deep breath, holding the chalk between her fingers. The cold surface of the blackboard seemed to welcome her back to a place that had once been her home, the world of calculations, equations, absolute precision. Her eyes scanned every symbol written there, and a spark of memory lit up. "Before I start, I want to ask something," Emily said firmly. "Do any of you remember a student named Emily Carter?" Dr. Charles Miller and Dr. Helen Foster exchanged immediate glances. Joseph Adams, a senior professor who had just approached, drawn by the commotion, raised his head as if he'd heard a familiar name from the distant past. "Emily Carter," Adams murmured, almost to himself. "The prodigy girl." Miller's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh my God, of course. You were the student who mastered anatomy like it was your second language." Helen nodded slowly, still in disbelief. "You published that paper in medical physics. I remember it perfectly. It was discussed in national seminars." Hayes clenched his fists, irritated. "That doesn't prove anything. Could just be a coincidence of names." Emily lifted her chin, resolute. "It's not a coincidence. I am Emily Carter, the same student who was top of her class for 4 years straight, who published international papers, who received invitations from Harvard Medical School and MIT for research." The murmurs began among the professors gathered near the door. Joseph Adams furrowed his brow, as if reliving old memories. "It's true. She vanished in her 5th year, never came back to class." Emily nodded firmly. "That was me, and I disappeared because my life fell apart." Helen crossed her arms, her voice filled with disbelief. "You were the brightest student we ever had. Why didn't you ever say anything, Emily?" "Because no one asked," she replied, not with anger but with sadness. "To everyone here, I was just the janitor, invisible." Miller stepped forward, looking from Emily to Hayes. "She's telling the truth. I remember her presenting seminars in her 3rd year. She recited complex formulas from memory, something not even PhD candidates could do with that much confidence." Emily took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears. "What happened to me wasn't lack of ability. It was a choice. I chose my child. I chose my dignity. But the cost was everything I had worked for." Hayes let out a short, mocking laugh, trying to regain control. "Then if you are who you say you are, prove it. Solve the equation and show us you're not just a sad story." Emily looked at the blackboard again. The chalk, firm in her hand, felt both heavy and light. She stepped closer, took a deep breath, and began to write. Each stroke on the board felt like a revelation. She identified the variables, structured the formulas, described the radioactive decay of cesium-137 with confidence, and noted half-life data and emission energy as if reciting lyrics to a song she knew by heart. Cesium-137 decay, 30-year half-life, she explained aloud, so everyone could hear. Beta emission energy of 0.662 mega-electron volts. Helen's eyes widened, and she whispered to Miller, "She remembers every detail." Emily continued without hesitation. Tissue absorption varies by organ density. Bone tissue has an average density of 1.9 GCM3, adipose tissue 0.9, muscle tissue 1.06. Miller crossed his arms, clearly impressed. "She's right, every value is accurate." Emily kept developing the calculations, each line flowing naturally. The equation took shape on the board with a clarity rarely seen even in scientific conferences. "Exponential absorption integral," she murmured, sketching the functions with quick strokes. Considering logarithmic attenuation of radiation based on tissue depth, Joseph Adams stepped closer, his eyes gleaming. "This is extraordinary. She's solving in minutes what graduate students would take hours to finish." With each line, the atmosphere shifted. Hayes's sarcasm gave way to a heavy silence as the professors witnessed the impossible. Emily wasn't just solving the equation. She was teaching it, explaining, detailing each part with the clarity and confidence of someone who hadn't just studied it, but had mastered it. Finally, after integrating the final calculations, she raised the chalk and wrote the result at the bottom of the board. Recommended therapeutic dose, 2.7 gray for tumoral tissue, with a 15% safety margin for adjacent tissues. She dropped the chalk, took a deep breath, and wiped her hands on her navy uniform. She turned to Hayes with a steady gaze. "Done. Equation solved." The silence that followed was absolute. Miller stepped forward first, examining each line of the calculations. He ran his fingers along the board, as if trying to feel the precision etched into it. After a few minutes, he turned to his colleagues. "It's correct. Not just correct. It's flawless." Helen stepped closer too, her eyes scanning the symbols until she stopped at a particular line. Here, she used a Laplace transform to simplify the integral. "I didn't learn that technique until my PhD." Joseph Adams nodded, amazed. "And here she used a fifth-order Taylor approximation to calculate tissue attenuation. That's advanced graduate-level material." Miller looked up at Hayes. "There's no doubt. Emily Carter didn't just solve it. She demonstrated knowledge beyond any student we've ever had in this room." The murmurs among the faculty grew louder, and Emily remained standing, silent, her pregnant belly visible under the uniform. There was no exaggerated pride in her stance, only the quiet certainty of someone who had finally been heard. Hayes, pale, felt the ground shift beneath him. The woman who had gone unnoticed through the hallways, cleaning rooms, had just proven before everyone that she was a wasted genius. Emily stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Hayes, I believe we had a deal." The professors exchanged looks in complete silence. For the first time, the power wasn't in the dean's hands. It was in hers. $5 million. Richard Hayes's voice came out shaky, as if he'd just woken from a nightmare. Emily kept her eyes locked on him, not moving an inch. The entire room felt suspended in the air, everyone waiting for the response he would now be forced to give. "Exactly," she confirmed, crossing her arms over her belly. "That's what you promised, not just to me, but in front of all these witnesses." Dr. Charles Miller was the first to speak. "I confirm I heard the promise, Richard. You said you'd give her $5 million if she solved the equation." Helen Foster still standing by the door, nodded. And we all know she not only solved it, she delivered a flawless result. Hayes rubbed the back of his neck, clearly rattled. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. The man who had long ruled the halls of Carter University with arrogance now found himself cornered. "This is ridiculous," he tried to argue. "It was a joke, a provocation." Emily stepped forward, her voice steady. "No, Mr. Hayes, it wasn't a joke. You humiliated me in front of your colleagues, treated me like a punchline, and to top it off, made a public bet. Now, you need to honor it." Miller turned to Hayes, serious. "Richard, if you back out now, you'll lose any credibility you still have with us." The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. More professors were approaching, drawn by the commotion. Among them were Dr. Matthew Collins from surgery and Dr. Sarah Bennett from pediatrics. They stopped at the door, trying to make sense of the tension. "What's going on here?" Collins asked. "Why is everyone gathered?" "Our janitor just solved an equation that my top students couldn't crack in 2 hours," Helen replied, not hiding the irony. "Now the dean has to decide whether he's going to pay the $5 million he promised." $5 million? Collins raised an eyebrow, surprised. Emily raised the digital recorder she had pulled from her uniform pocket. The small object seemed insignificant, but its metallic glint drew everyone's attention. "This isn't just about money," she said calmly. "There's more at stake here." Hayes's eyes widened. "What is that?" 3 years working here, hearing conversations you all assumed no one was listening to." Emily pressed a button, and a voice echoed through the room. It was Hayes's voice, crystal clear. "Senator McCarthy's son failed anatomy, but the family made a generous donation. Let's reconsider his grade." The impact was immediate. Miller turned slowly toward the dean, disbelief etched on his face. Helen brought a hand to her mouth, stunned. Collins and Bennett stepped fully into the room, as if needing to confirm what they'd just heard. This can't be real," Bennett whispered. Emily turned off the device and stared directly at Hayes. "That's just one example. I have 47 recordings, 47 cases of favoritism, academic corruption, and violations of this institution's integrity." Hayes swallowed hard, his face going pale. "You recorded private conversations?" "I cleaned the dean's office, faculty lounges, your so-called confidential meetings. To you, I was invisible, but I understood every word." The tension in the room was suffocating. Miller stepped toward Emily, his voice low and serious. "What do you plan to do with those recordings?" Emily didn't hesitate. "That depends. If this university is willing to make amends for what was done to me and change its corrupt practices, the recordings stay in a drawer. If not, tomorrow they'll be in the newspapers and in the hands of the Department of Education." Helen crossed her arms, her expression a mix of indignation and admiration. "And what exactly are your demands?" Emily stood before them all, each word clear and calculated. "First, I want my medical degree officially recognized. I didn't lose my scholarship due to poor performance, but because I was denied medical leave during my pregnancy." "That's true," Adams murmured, recalling the administration's rigid policy. "Second, I want a position as a medical physics professor. My academic record and published work justify that." Bennett looked at Miller, clearly impressed. 7 published articles as a student. That's more than most of our residents achieve in years." Emily continued. "Third, I want the creation of a scholarship fund for vulnerable students, especially single mothers. No one should have to go through what I did." Hayes tried to protest, but Emily raised the recorder again. "If you refuse, the recordings will speak for me." Silence fell like a verdict. Even those who had long defended the university's system realized they had reached a point of no return. Miller was the first to speak. "She's right. It's fair." Helen nodded, looking at Emily with something close to respect. "And more than fair, It's necessary. Hayes felt the room spinning around him. For the first time, he realized he had no power. The young woman before him, pregnant in uniform, had just flipped the board. Emily returned the recorder to her pocket, but her gaze didn't soften. "Mr. Hayes, you have until the end of the day to give me a final answer. By 6 p.m., I expect to know whether this university is willing to correct its wrongs." She turned toward the door, but before leaving added, "And regarding the $5 million from your bet, I expect the transfer to be completed today. This is only the beginning." The professor stepped aside, silent. Hayes remained frozen, pale, as the sound of Emily's footsteps echoed down the hallway. For the first time, everyone understood. The woman he had tried to humiliate hadn't just solved the equation. She now held the future of Carter University in her hands. "Do you realize what's happening, Richard?" The voice of Marcos Whitaker, a veteran attorney from Boston, echoed through the spacious office of the dean's wing. Hayes wiped the sweat from his forehead, pacing behind the desk. "I'm being blackmailed by a former student who's right about everything." Marcos adjusted his glasses, flipping through the stack of documents Hayes had handed him. "You promised $5 million in front of witnesses, and to make matters worse, she has 47 recordings of academic corruption. If this goes public, Richard, Carter University could collapse." Hayes slammed his hand on the desk. "I can't just hand over control of the university to a janitor." "She's not a janitor," Marcos interrupted firmly. "She's Emily Carter, the same one who, according to archived records, published 7 international articles during her undergrad. The same one who got offers from Harvard and MIT. The same one you destroyed with a single administrative decision." Richard leaned back in his chair, the weight of the memory crushing him. "We denied her medical leave when she got pregnant. We took away her full scholarship 3 months before graduation. And now she's back to collect," Marcos concluded. The secretary's phone rang on the other side of the door, followed by a soft knock announcing her entrance. "Mr. Hayes, there's a journalist here, Carla Mendoza from the Boston Globe. She says she received a tip about irregularities at the university." The dean's face went pale. "Tell her I'm not in. Tell her I stepped out for a meeting." Once the secretary left, Marcos sighed heavily. "Do you understand, Richard? Emily isn't wasting time. She's applying pressure on multiple fronts. First the equation challenge, then the recordings, now the press. She's no amateur." Hayes jumped to his feet. "I need to buy time. Maybe offer a partial deal, reduce her demands." "Forget it," Marcos cut him off. "If you try to cheat her, she'll expose everything, and there isn't a court in Massachusetts that could ignore evidence like this." As the two argued, the door suddenly opened. It was Dr. Charles Miller, accompanied by Helen Foster and other faculty members who had witnessed the classroom incident. "We need to talk," said Miller, urgency in his tone. Hayes took a deep breath, straightening his tie. "About what?" Helen stepped forward, facing him squarely. "About Emily Carter, and about the future of this university." The group settled in, forming a tense circle. Miller got straight to the point. "Richard, you need to accept her terms." Hayes exploded. "Are you all insane? She's blackmailing us." "No," Helen countered. "She's demanding justice. That's different. This woman was one of the best students this school ever had. We watched her be discarded like trash, and now we have a chance to make it right." Dr. Matthew Collins crossed his arms, backing her up. "If she releases those recordings, there won't be a shred left of Carter University's reputation. Our donors will run. Elite families won't want their names associated with scandal." Sarah Bennett from Pediatrics added, "But if we accept, we can turn the page. Emily has connections, ability, international recognition. She could raise this university to a level we've never dreamed of." Hayes looked around at each of them, stunned. "You're seriously suggesting I give her a degree she didn't finish, a faculty position, and pay her $5 million? You promised the 5 million, Miller reminded him. Publicly. If you back out now, your word means nothing. A heavy silence followed. Then Helen spoke, her voice low but resolute. Richard, think. You can fight this and watch Carter University fall apart in days, or you can accept and transform it into a model of excellence. The wall clock read 4:15 p.m. Emily had given them until 6. Time was running out. We need to call a university council meeting, said Miller. An emergency session. Today. Hayes shook his head, resistant. This is madness. It's the only way, Sarah replied, and you know it. An hour later, the council was gathered in a closed meeting room inside the administration building. 9 members were present, deans, department heads, and external advisors. Hayes presented the situation with a biased spin, omitting the recordings but emphasizing Emily's academic record and the need for institutional reparation. Dr. Silva, president of the council, reviewed the documents. 7 articles published in international journals. That's impressive. Exactly, Helen added. And she still has connections to Harvard, MIT, and Oxford. She could bring in international research partnerships. Councilwoman Davis raised an eyebrow. And the financial part? I heard $5 million were involved. It was a public promise, Hayes admitted, clearly uncomfortable. I'll have to pay. Better to lose $5 million now than the entire university later, Dr. Silva commented. The vote was called. After heated discussion, the final tally, 7 in favor, 2 against. Emily's conditions were accepted. Hayes looked at the clock. 5:40 p.m. He had 20 minutes to deliver the decision. In the parking lot, he found Emily about to get into an old, modest car. She turned slowly, one hand resting on her belly. Do you have an answer? She asked. Hayes took a deep breath. Yes. The council approved all your conditions. The degree, the faculty position, the scholarship fund. And the 5 million will be transferred today. Emily studied him in silence for a few seconds before finally responding. Good. He tried to soften the moment. Emily, I know I made terrible mistakes. I want you to know I acknowledge that. Recognition doesn't change the past, she said, opening the car door, but it can change the future. Before stepping in, she added, I start Monday, Mr. Hayes. I hope you're ready to see this university truly change. The old engine rumbled to life as she pulled away slowly, leaving Hayes alone in the parking lot, staring after her with the dawning realization that his life and the history of Carter University would never be the same again. Professor Carter, the results from the Harvard collaboration just came in. Melissa Johnson's excited voice echoed down the bright corridor of the university's new research building. Emily adjusted the baby in her arms, gently rocking little James, just 3 months old, as she turned to face the student. Good news? She asked, offering a tired but genuine smile. Melissa held a thick folder packed with charts and data tables. The best possible. The protocol you developed reduced the side effects of radiotherapy in children by 40%. Emily paused for a moment, her eyes filling with tears. She kissed her son's forehead and murmured, That means hundreds of children will have a chance to fight with less pain. Thousands, Professor, Melissa corrected, visibly moved. The technique is already being implemented in hospitals across 15 countries. The two stepped into the state-of-the-art lab, recently built with direct investment from the university. A golden plaque at the entrance proudly displayed the name Advanced Medical Physics Laboratory, Professor Emily Carter. The space, filled with cutting-edge equipment, had been built with $2 million of institutional funding, an investment that, in just 6 months, had already yielded immeasurable academic and medical breakthroughs. Emily placed James in a portable crib inside the lab and, adjusting the white lab coat over her dress, opened the folder Melissa had handed her. Her eyes scanned each result, every comparison with previous methods, and pride was inevitable. "This is only the beginning," she said, more to herself than to the student. "We can change the global standard of treatment." Melissa smiled, then shifted topics. "And Sophia, how are her updates?" Emily looked up, her eyes filled with pride. "My daughter was accepted first in her class to Columbia University's medical program, full scholarship." Melissa chuckled softly. "Sounds like she's following in your footsteps." "She's following her own path," Emily corrected firmly. "But now she knows she can dream big without fear." The lab door opened gently. Richard Hayes stepped in. Different from months ago, there was no arrogance in his demeanor anymore, only respect. He stopped at the doorway, waiting to be acknowledged. "Emily, sorry to interrupt," he said with a politeness that hadn't existed in his former vocabulary. "I got a call from MIT. They want to schedule a video conference for the next semester's partnership." Emily nodded, turning to him. "Book it for Thursday morning." "Certainly," he replied, but didn't leave right away. He lingered, somewhat hesitant. "May I speak with you in private?" Melissa got the message and quietly gathered the folder, leaving the room. Hayes walked up to the central table, carrying a rolled-up magazine in his hands. "I wanted to show you something," he said, opening it to the cover and handing it to Emily. Her eyes widened when she saw her own photo on the front of Nature Medicine. The headline took up half the page. "A revolution in pediatric radiotherapy. American protocol redefines global treatment." Emily ran her fingers over the cover, almost in disbelief. "This is incredible." Hayes pointed to the feature article. "Doctors from around the world were interviewed, all praising your research. In 6 months, Emily, you've brought more international recognition to Carter University than we've had in 50 years. She flipped through the pages, reading excerpts where experts described her method as a game changer and the future of pediatric radiotherapy. Hayes took a deep breath. "I just wanted to say thank you." Emily looked up. "Thank me for what?" "For not destroying everything when you had the chance, for giving me a second chance, for showing me how to be a better person." She offered a measured smile. "You learned that on your own, Richard. I just showed you there was another path." He nodded, thoughtful. "And what a path! Do you know how many underprivileged students applied to our new scholarship program?" "How many?" she asked. 347. "And thanks to the fund we created, we're accepting all of them." Emily felt her chest warm. The scholarship fund for single mothers had been one of her conditions, and seeing it succeed in practice was one of the greatest victories of her life. "There's one more thing," Hayes continued. "I got a call from the Department of Education. They want to use Carter University as a national model for inclusive academic policy." "Are you serious?" "Completely. The program you created has become a benchmark." At that moment, Emily's phone vibrated on the table. She answered, instantly recognizing the voice on the other end. "Professor Thompson, it's a pleasure to hear from you." The conversation continued fluently in English for 10 minutes. Hayes observed, impressed by how naturally she discussed technical terms and negotiated the details of an international collaboration. When she hung up, Emily explained, "Harvard wants me to lead a 3-year joint project, $15 million in funding." Hayes could barely believe it. 15 million? "For research in nuclear medicine applied to rare diseases. We'll be working with universities around the globe." He shook his head, still processing. "Emily, you've transformed this university in 6 months. We now have partnerships with Harvard, MIT, Oxford. Our students are being accepted into the world's top graduate programs. And this is just the beginning, she said, cradling James as he began to fuss. Next week, I'm hosting a delegation from Japan interested in our digital radiography protocols. It could bring in millions in royalties. Hayes sat down, looking at her with genuine admiration. You know what's amazing? 6 months ago, I thought I was losing $5 million to a foolish bet. Today, I realize it was the best investment of my life. Emily walked to the window, looking out over the courtyard where students from all backgrounds talked side by side. Richard, want to hear a secret? He smiled. Of course. I could have destroyed you and this university. I could have sold the recordings, sued, burned it all to the ground. Why didn't you? She turned. James nestled peacefully in her arms. Because destruction doesn't build anything. I wanted justice, but I also wanted opportunity. I wanted to prove that competence will always overcome prejudice. Hayes nodded, emotional. And you did. We did, she corrected. You learned. I grew. The university changed. Everyone won. At that moment, Dr. Charles Miller appeared at the door with Helen Foster and Joseph Adams. Emily, we wanted to invite you to the celebration dinner, Miller said. What celebration? She asked, curious. Helen smiled. Time magazine named Carter University, one of the 10 most innovative institutions in the world, because of your work in nuclear medicine and social inclusion. Joseph added, you put our country on the global scientific map. Miller chuckled. And let's not forget, it all started with an equation she solved in 18 minutes. Emily looked around, seeing genuine respect on their faces, not fear, real admiration. I accept the dinner invitation, she said, then added, on one condition. What condition? Hayes asked. I want all the cleaning staff invited. They deserve to be there just as much as anyone else. The silence that followed was one of pure reverence. They'll be the guests of honor, Hayes promised. And in that moment, Emily Carter knew the transformation that had started in room 204 was now reaching every corner of the university. Good evening, everyone. It is a tremendous honor to welcome you here tonight. Richard Hayes's voice echoed through the main auditorium of Carter University, brightly lit and filled with guests. Emily adjusted her elegant blue dress, gently holding a sleeping James in her arms as she looked out at the packed audience. More than 500 people were in attendance for the celebration dinner. Professors, students, dignitaries, and, as she had requested, every member of the cleaning staff seated in places of honor right up front. She took a deep breath, remembering all the times she had cleaned that very auditorium, invisible to those now watching her. Tonight, she was the center of attention. Emily, Sophia whispered beside her, dressed in a sleek black outfit. They're waiting for you. Emily stood, walking toward the podium to a rising wave of applause. As soon as she stepped onto the stage, the sound swelled into a standing ovation. She waited for the crowd to settle, resting one hand on the podium while still rocking her baby in the other. When I used to clean this auditorium, she began, her voice clear and steady, many of you would walk past me as if I didn't exist. And that's okay, because invisibility can sometimes be a form of protection. But tonight I want you to understand something very important. Competence doesn't wear a uniform. Intelligence doesn't depend on social class. Talent can be found anywhere. It just needs a chance. The room was utterly silent, absorbing her every word. Some of you come from wealthy families. Others, like I once did, rely on scholarships to study. But every one of you has the same potential to change the world. She paused, locking eyes with the younger students in the front rows. Never judge a person by the clothes they wear or the job they do. The janitor today could be tomorrow's professor. The waiter today could be tomorrow's doctor. Everyone deserves respect and opportunity. A wave of emotion swept through the crowd. Emily took a deep breath before continuing. And to the girls here tonight, especially those who may one day become mothers, motherhood is not the end of your dreams. It's the beginning of even bigger ones. You can be mothers and scientists, mothers and doctors, mothers and anything you choose to be. The applause started soft, then grew thunderous. Many students wiped away tears. Emily waited for the room to quiet before finishing. I want everyone to leave here tonight with this truth. Competence always beats arrogance, knowledge always triumphs over prejudice, and dignity never depends on anyone's approval. As she stepped down from the podium, still under a storm of applause, she saw Richard Hayes standing in the front row, clapping with quiet tears in his eyes. The professors around him were on their feet as well, united in genuine admiration. Months passed. The university's transformation had grown beyond anything Emily had imagined. Carter University became the first family-founded American institution to be ranked among the world's top 50 universities. One morning, Hayes found her in the hallway, holding a folder full of documents. Emily, an official invitation just arrived from Harvard. They want you to teach as a visiting professor. She smiled, but shook her head. I appreciate it. But my place is here, changing lives in my own country, creating opportunities for those who've never had them. Hayes nodded without argument. He had learned that once Emily made a decision, there was no room for debate. As she walked the halls, Emily watched students from all backgrounds working together, sharing ideas, discussing projects, preparing research. The scholarship fund she had helped create had forever changed the makeup of the university. Sophia, now 19, stopped by for a visit. Mom, I have to tell you, I got into the summer program at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. Emily hugged her tightly. I knew you would. Sophia laughed through happy tears. I made it because you showed me nothing is impossible. 3 years later in the lab, little James was taking his first wobbly steps among tables full of equipment. Emily rushed to catch him before he toppled a stack of papers. Come here, little explorer, she said, lifting him into her arms. Looking out the lab window, she spotted a young woman in a grey uniform pushing a cleaning cart. She was pregnant, carefully wiping down every corner. Emily smiled, recognizing the image. It had once been her own. She left the lab and walked toward the young woman. Hi, what's your name? The girl looked up, startled. Carla Ramirez, ma'am. Are you studying, Carla? She hesitated, embarrassed. I'm trying to finish high school at night, but it's hard with the pregnancy. Emily smiled warmly. I'm glad you're studying. Keep going. And if you ever need help, you can come find me. My office is room 204. Carla's eyes widened. Room 204? Isn't that the one with the huge equation on the board? Emily nodded, eyes sparkling. Exactly. The same equation that changed my life. She returned to the lab, holding James and watching as Sophia sorted through papers at a nearby table. The cycle was repeating, but this time in a different way. The opportunity once denied to her, she would make sure was offered to others. Because Emily knew, more than anyone, that competence always beats prejudice. And that sometimes a simple bet can change not just a life, but the destiny of an entire generation. Professor Emily, the Boston Globe team is here for the interview, announced Marina, her research assistant rushing into the advanced medical physics lab. Emily looked up from the report she was reviewing and smiled, adjusting her glasses. The lab was quiet that morning, except for the soft hum of machines running. Sophia, now a medical student at Massachusetts General Hospital, was sitting beside her, going over articles with her mother. 3-year-old James played in a corner with building blocks. Great. Please have them wait in the conference room. I just need 5 more minutes to finish this section before I meet them, Emily replied calmly. Marina nodded and left, while Sophia approached her. "Mom, you're really never going to stop working until the last possible second, are you?" Emily chuckled. "Hard to switch off when the work you do saves lives." A few minutes later, the conference room was full. Alongside the Globe team were representatives from the Department of Education, international journalists, and renowned professors there to witness the announcement. The feature story would cover the academic revolution Emily was leading at Carter University, which had, in just 3 years, become a global reference in nuclear medicine and educational inclusion. "Professor Emily Carter," began the lead journalist, an elegant woman with short brown hair, "is it true that your university has been selected by the federal government as a national model for inclusion policies?" Emily nodded firmly. "Yes. The program we created for students in socially vulnerable situations, especially single mothers, is now being replicated in over 40 universities across the country." A murmur of admiration spread through the room. Another journalist raised a hand. "What about international partnerships? There are rumors you've secured record funding from Harvard and MIT." "Not just from them," Emily replied. "We're running joint projects with Oxford, Tokyo, and Geneva. Just in the past year, we've received over $20 million in funding for cutting-edge research." Camera flashes lit up her face. Then Hayes entered the room quietly. He was no longer the arrogant man of the past. His expression was calm, changed. He walked over and spoke in a low tone. "Emily, sorry to interrupt. I just got off the phone with the Secretary of Education. They want you to attend the International Congress in Washington to present our model." Emily smiled, grateful. "Tell them I'll be there." The interview continued for over an hour. At the end, the Boston Globe journalist asked, "Professor, could you share a final message for students across the country who will read this story?" Emily paused for a few seconds before answering. "Competence doesn't wear a uniform, carry a fancy last name, or rely on wealth. It only needs opportunity. My role is to make sure those opportunities reach everyone." The room filled with applause. That evening, Emily returned home exhausted, but with a peaceful heart. Sophia was preparing dinner, and James was running around the living room with a makeshift cape, pretending to be a superhero. Emily dropped her bag on the couch and scooped him up, laughing. "And who's this little hero?" she asked, kissing his cheek. "I'm going to be a scientist just like you, Mommy," James replied with youthful enthusiasm. Emily's eyes welled up. "Then the world will be in good hands." The following weekend, a major event took place in the university's main auditorium, a ceremony marking Carter University's entry into the global top 50 institutions. Professors, students, staff, and international guests filled the space. On stage, Emily looked into the crowd and spotted Carla Ramirez, now a first-year biology student, beaming with pride. "A few years ago, I stood here in a different role," Emily began in her speech. "I cleaned these very seats and believed my dream had ended. But today, I'm here to prove that no obstacle is too great for someone who refuses to give up." She discreetly pointed toward Carla, who blushed, visibly moved. "And I want to say this to everyone. Never forget those who work behind the scenes. Often, the greatest talents come from them." The audience rose in a standing ovation. After the ceremony, Hayes approached her. "Emily, I want to thank you again. You didn't just save this university, you turned it into something I never even dreamed of." Emily looked at him firmly, but with compassion. "We all change, Richard. The difference is what we do once we've learned." That night, before leaving the university, Emily walked to room 204. The famous equation still remained on the board, preserved as a symbol of the day everything changed. She touched the chalk resting in the tray and smiled. Sophia entered shortly after. "Mom, I always come back here when I need inspiration. This room is magical. Emily ran a hand through her daughter's hair. It's not the room that's magical, Sophia. It's the courage to face the impossible. The two stood in silence for a moment, gazing at the board. Then Emily said, "The cycle continues. It's up to us to make sure it becomes more just with every turn." The next morning, the front page of the Boston Globe featured a photo of Emily holding James with the headline, "From Janitor to Global Scientist, the woman who transformed American education." Emily smiled as she held the paper in her hands. She knew this wasn't just her story. It was the story of every invisible woman carrying dreams beneath a uniform, of students battling social barriers, of children who needed someone to believe in. As she walked across campus, accompanied by Sophia and James, Emily saw students from all walks of life laughing together in the gardens, professors discussing new research, and staff being greeted with respect. It was living proof that her fight had been worth it. And in that moment, Emily knew for certain, sometimes a simple bet doesn't just change one person's future. It can change the course of an entire generation.
Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.